the Tuesday, March 12th Finance and Planning Committee meeting at the RTD. The meeting will now come to order, and we are convened as of 5:30 p.m. Mountain Daylight Time. I would respectfully ask everyone who is attending this meeting to mute yourself unless you are recognized to speak. It will give us a much clearer record that way. I want to thank you all for joining us this evening. Please note that the committee meetings of the RTD Board of Directors will, for the time being, continue to be held remotely via Zoom, and they will be audio and video recorded. The meeting recordings, along with the unofficial minutes of these meetings, will be posted as soon as practicable on the RTD Board website. During today's meeting, we are also providing what is called Communication Access Real-Time Translation. That's also known as CART. Anyone who would like to access this service should send an email to the RTD Board Office at rtd.boardoffice@rtd-denver.com, and a link will be provided to you for the CART. Additionally, the CART transcript can be automatically translated into Spanish for anyone who would like access to a live transcript of this meeting in Spanish. And a live stream of this meeting is also available via RTD's YouTube page. I would now like to call the roll for the committee members. Director Bob Broom.
Present.
Director Peggy Catlin.
Present.
Thank you. Director Bobby Deschel.
Present.
Director Lynn Geisinger.
I'm here.
Director Joyanne Rusha. And Vice Chair Michael Guzman. I think, you unmuted for that. All right, I know he is traveling. And I am the chair, Doug Tisdale. And for the record, I will note that we also have Directors Jamie Lewis, Troy Whitmore, Board Chair Eric Davidson, and I think that's all. Are there any directors that I have missed?
This is Director Sloan. I'm here as well.
Thank you very much, Director Sloan. Marjorie Sloan is with us. All right, I would now like to open our public comment session. This is available to anyone who would like to address the committee regarding any topic that is listed in our published meeting agenda, either for this current month or for the immediately preceding month. And I'm sorry, there we go. Thank you for going on mute. If you wish to speak and you haven't already done this, please either raise your virtual hand or press *9 on your smartphone, and we'll be able to recognize you that way. Now, during this time, the public comment time, the committee will not be offering any direct comments or responses to anything that is said. However, if you would like to be contacted regarding your public comment, once again, please email the RTD Board Office at the email address I read earlier, which I will now repeat, rtd.boardoffice@rtd-denver.com. Now, I'd like to ask staff if there are any hands that are raised or if anyone has indicated on their phone that they would like to speak at this time.
Hi, Chair Tisdale. This is Jack Kroll, Executive Manager of the Board Office. At this time, we have no one present who has indicated a desire to share public comment.
All right, thank you. And while we have your attention, may I have you confirm whether or not we have received any written communications through email or otherwise for people who wanted to make a statement in the public comment session?
Yes, Director Tisdale, this is Jack Kroll, Executive Manager of the Board Office again. While we received some public comment for tomorrow night's Operations and Safety Committee meeting, we have not received any public comment for this evening's meeting via email or other form of correspondence. We have circulated the public comment for tomorrow's meeting already to the board.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. It reminds me of service on condominium HOA boards. If nobody wants to speak in public comment, you must be doing something right. So we appreciate that. With no participants in the queue, we will now close the public comment period for this meeting of the Finance and Planning Committee. And then next, oh, here we go. The next item on our agenda is to receive information from external entities. We make this available if there are other entities, government agencies, and otherwise who would like to address us. I am informed that we have no information from any external entities to be presented to us this month. Let me just ask Mr. Kroll if you would confirm that, please.
Yes, that is correct, Committee Chair Tisdale.
Thank you very much, sir. Then we turn to the next item on our agenda, a very important matter that will take some time, and you have seen the written materials in the committee packet. And this is an update from our Revenue Diversification Working Group. This presentation will be brought to us by our board chair, Eric Davidson, and others whom he will invite for comment during that time. So, board chair, I turn it over to you, sir.
Thank you, Committee Chair Tisdale. Very much appreciated. Thank you, members of the committee and the board who are here this evening. Look forward to presenting this item. I am prepared. I can share my screen. However, I do want to confirm with the board office. Do you have a version, Mr. Kroll, that you are planning to share for this? If not, I can go ahead and share what I believe to be the final presentation.
Chair Davidson, I don't have one at the ready, but I can easily get one if that would be your preference. What I would do is simply download the packet and share what was included in the packet.
I'll go ahead and share a PowerPoint screen, and if you could just let me know if that appears, that would be great. Give me one moment.
We can see it on the screen here.
Is this showing up properly in presentation mode?
Sure is.
Great. Thank you very much. All right, thank you, everybody. I'm going to take us through this presentation. Also note that a number of members of the Revenue Diversification Working Group from staff are present. And so I'll present this and then we will take questions. And I certainly invite at the end of my presentation any input from members of the working group prior to taking any questions should I miss any salient points here. So what I'll walk through in this presentation is just a brief reminder of the Revenue Diversification Working Group, what it is. Then I'll move into a discussion around RTD's funding profile, which is something the working group has been discussing. I'll also then touch on the mid and long-term financial outlook of RTD. I will talk about TABOR impact and mitigation research, as well as some next steps. So I'll step through this, through each of those sections. So first of all, as we all recall, the Revenue Diversification Working Group came out of a discussion regarding an important policy priority of this board at the 2023 board retreat. During that retreat, the board highlighted the risk that the agency faces by being predominantly dependent on a single source of revenue. We had identified as a policy priority that we would like to develop a diverse set of external subsidies that could provide some stability, ensure that we are diversified and not dependent on a single source, increase the probability that if one revenue stream were to decline, that we have what I have often used the words of our Chief Financial Officer, Doug McLeod, a backstop to the decline in revenue, and look at what external subsidies might be available to us. The idea was to investigate what is possible. And so I'll be talking a little bit about what's been looked at, what's been discussed. I think just to get to the conclusion and let everyone know, I think I've mentioned before, the conclusion is largely there's not much we can do inside of our four walls that is material. We need to engage with voters as well as with policymakers, the state legislature, and cities and counties to explore opportunities. So as we'll be seeing later in the presentation, a lot of what we've been dialoguing about is how to take the facts and information we've learned and communicate them in a constructive outward fashion to seek assistance in this area. But out of this policy discussion that we had at that board retreat, or that policy priority, we formed the the revenue diversification working group to make informed decisions or recommendations to the board rather regarding opportunities for revenue diversification, fiscal policy enhancements, and other financial measures to support the long-term fiscal sustainability of RTD. The working group is largely comprised of staff. This is the staff led by a working group participant, which is our General Manager and CEO, Deborah Johnson. The working group also includes Doug McLeod, our Chief Financial Officer, Melanie Snyder, our General Counsel, Michael Davies, our Government Relations Officer, Brendan Morgan, our Senior Manager of Debt and Investments, and more recently, Stuart Summers, our Chief Communications and Engagement Officer. I have served as a liaison from the board, attending these meetings and participating in them, and have been joined by our previous chair, Lynn Geisinger, who had stayed very close to this throughout 2023 while she served as chair. Some of the tasks completed, most are on the slide here. There are a few things that I'll also touch upon that are not on the slide, but we looked at, we examined finances and efficiencies and stayed anchored in the RTD's Reimagine plan. You'll see a later reference to the mobility plan for the future. We had done some financial projections and also had created our system optimization plan. Those plans were sort of our guide in terms of our financial projections. We considered fund balance policies linked to mitigating revenue volatility. I'll let our Chief Financial Officer, Doug McLeod, answer questions along these lines, but I thank the chair of this committee, Doug Tisdale, for ensuring that the work plan does include discussion around fiscal policies, which I do believe some of our 2025 considerations will be shaped by some of what's been learned by the Revenue Diversification Working Group, particularly around Tabor impact mitigation. We've investigated alternatives, creating a new enterprise for fares. We'll touch on that when we talk about Tabor, and a variety of areas around Tabor regarding accounting processes, looking at various deductions, historical Tabor calculations to really understand what impact Tabor may have on this agency, which we'll touch upon. And we investigated some accounting opportunities and allocations between the base system and fast tracks. Not on this slide, the Revenue Diversification Working Group also compiled historical information. There's no new ideas under the sun. Our General Counsel Snyder led the effort on that and compiled information around previous efforts that boards of directors in the past at RTD have taken and staff has taken in looking at revenue diversification opportunities. There were a number of efforts in the past that just further informed some of our conclusions that what we really need to do is get a common set of facts well communicated out to stakeholders in the region and communicate out what's at stake with respect to transit to encourage other investments and sort of reinforced our ideas. There's not a lot we can look at here. Another thing that we did that you'll be seeing here is looking at our funding profile and some benchmarking in terms of where we fit in terms of transit investment across the United States. And that's actually where I want to start in terms of presenting some of what was discussed at the working group for the past couple months in particular, which is our funding profile. I think this slide, this is, we all know this, are very familiar with this, but I do think it's very worth touching upon. And this is going to be an area that we want to ensure that we well communicate out to the public how RTD is funded and how transit can be funded generally. When we look at the primary categories of funding for U.S. transit agencies, and specifically those that are reported to the National Transit Database, there are a couple of large categories. One is fare collection. Two is taxes and fees directly levied by the transit agency. This is a model by which the taxpayer directly pays taxes to the transit agency. That is very much where RTD is and who we are. There is also a third bucket, which can be local funding from municipalities and counties. There is a fourth bucket, which is state funding, which can come from the form of a general fund or it can come from a dedicated transportation fund. And then, of course, as we are all aware, and as a substantial portion of our budgeted revenues, there are federal funding operating grants. In terms of the local, state, and directly levied by the transit agency taxes and fees that can be collected, there are many. One of the most common is sales and use tax, which certainly is our primary funding mechanism and is true for many other agencies as well. But there are other categories. As we mentioned, the state funds, but there are many things such as vehicle registration fees, payroll taxes, lottery revenue, vehicle leasing fees, gas tax, tolls, vehicle rental fees, parking fees, property tax, real estate taxes and fees, and a whole long list of many other things that are used. It can get a little bit tricky to look at how those are utilized across multiple transit agencies. It's very easy to do analysis on the National Transit Database and pull data from a category on the left standpoint, how much comes from the state, how much comes locally, how much goes directly to the transit agency from taxpayers. It's much harder to delve into what the source of those funds are without going directly into each of those agencies, which we did for some of the agencies that are, I hesitate after all this examination to call anyone quite peer, but certainly similar agencies that we have common modalities, service areas, ridership, and budget, did some looking at that. I think what's important to note, as I alluded to on the previous slide, we are squarely in the directly funded by the taxpayer category that is coming to us in the form of sales and use tax. That's 69% or approximately 70% of our 2024 budget. We'll talk about our midterm financial plan in a moment. And then we have a substantial portion from operating grants from the federal government. And then, of course, we do have a component that's fares. I think what's notable here is what's absent from this slide. There is no direct state funding. Sales and use tax sometimes does go through a transportation fund at the state level and is a state levied tax. That's not the case for RTD. Ours comes directly to us, and the state ultimately accounts for, I believe, 1% or less of our budgeted revenues, a similar order of magnitude for cities or municipalities and counties. This is an important piece I know we are all very familiar with, but needs to be well communicated out to our policymakers in the state and at the city and county level, as well as among taxpayers. As we're very familiar with, we collect a 1% sales and use tax on the midterm financial plan. Just as a reminder of looking out at a 6-year horizon, it is 75% of our revenue, so greater than what we have budgeted in 2024. We are dependent on that single source. That comes with the challenges we're familiar with, that it is subject to consumer spending volatility and economic trends. It's also worth noting that our base system, which makes up a large portion of that orange slice of the pie, will soon be subject to Tabor. We'll talk about that at the end of the presentation. And also this lack of diversity means that there's really no backstop or no floor, that essentially any shock to the system can almost immediately, or certainly after a very brief lag, impact our ability to deliver service, which this agency has experienced in its past, as we are all familiar. I wanted to touch on this. This is an area I'm very happy to go deeper with directors that have specific questions or would like to look at some of the data from the National Transit Database as well as other budgets. We had some conversations around how to benchmark RTD against other transit agencies to understand where we fit and also how we might communicate with policymakers. There were some interesting metrics that we looked at to compare ourselves: revenue per unlinked passenger trip, which is essentially revenue per rider, revenue per vehicle revenue miles, operating expenses per rider or unlinked passenger trip, operating expenses per revenue miles. These were interesting. Largely, I would categorize these somewhat as efficiency metrics to let you know how much slack you may have in the system, how efficiently that you're operating from a financial standpoint. What we found, it's obviously quite difficult to do a complete apples to apples comparison here because different transit agencies have widely different service areas and different transit modalities that dramatically affect your revenue and your operating expenses on a rider basis and on a square mile basis. But what we found, just to kind of draw a conclusion on this, is, for example, our operating expenses per rider is $10.84. We fit in a pretty good zone of, if you pick out peer agencies, we're on comparable footing in terms of how efficient we are and what we're spending on a rider basis and what we're spending on a vehicle revenue mile basis as well. One of the interesting things we started to look at with benchmarking that I want to touch on is what our funding looks like on a square mile basis, as well as on a per capita basis. This is very, very difficult, again, to do an apples to apples comparison because of, as our general manager has said before, and I like this phrasing: when you've seen one transit agency, you've seen one transit agency, or also difficult to compare apples to fish. We have a very large service area with very different land use than many of our peers. We cover essentially all of the modalities of travel. It makes comparison difficult, but comparison at the extremes, I think, can be somewhat useful to gain an idea of what overall transit investment in a region look like. So we had built out some tables based on the National Transit Database to capture funding levels. I want to just touch on a few things here. We have just that little diagram of the apple and the fish up there just to remind ourselves that we are kind of comparing apples to fish. While they're all transit agencies, very different capital models, very different operating models, very different in investments. But some extremes really do start to jump out. RTD is funded at a level of $372 per capita. That per capita is using the UZA, or urbanized area population. So it's important to recognize this is not necessarily using a calculation of all of the region that's encompassed or all of the population. It is using that primary UZA number. The reason for doing that is that's what's reported to the National Transit Database. So it allows us to normalize and directly compare ourselves to other agencies. What I would note here is that we're about 19th on the list in terms of transit agencies. There's quite a few major transit agencies ahead of us in terms of how they are funded on a per capita basis. Now, again, that can be a little bit deceiving when you're doing these comparisons, but the extremes are useful. If you compare that to Seattle, for example, there are multiple transit agencies serving different modalities across the Seattle area and also different land use patterns. So if you look at Snohomish County, for example, which has community transit, that addresses, a relatively smaller area, and it's very purpose-built for what it serves. King County Metro, serves in Seattle. Sound Transit runs across the system in a regional way. If you were to add together the collective investment in Seattle, you'd find that over $1,000 per capita is going into transit. So while it's tempting to compare us to, say, King County Metro or Sound Transit, you're really looking at what's the holistic regional investment. I think what personally jumps out to me is Colorado has tremendous opportunities as it grows and matures, if it wants a transit future, to be considering what a holistic region-wide investment in transit should look like, looking at areas like Seattle. Seattle certainly is not alone. If you look at the New York metro area, the Chicago area, many areas within California from LA to San Francisco, you find a similar dynamic where you have multiple transit agencies serving the same primary urbanized area and collectively have pretty sizable investments in transit. SEPTA is in Philadelphia. That's an interesting one to look at because they're in a similar area on the list as us in terms of per capita funding. They have some similar modalities, actually some common elements of the service area as well. But you'll notice that the funding per square mile is quite a bit different. And that what that does, again, looking at the extremes is what's important here. That really calls out the difference in land use patterns, that they have a very high density development pattern inside Philadelphia proper and then moving out from there. I think it's also notable that the Southeastern Pennsylvania Transportation Authority is facing a pretty sizable shortfall in their budget that is threatening both fare increases and sizable service reductions. Fortunately, they're having a great partnership and engagement with their state right now, with the governor and with their state legislature. I think it's reasonable to expect Pennsylvania will probably act and bolster investment in SEPTA to prevent some of those service reductions. I certainly don't want to speculate, but a number of agencies are having those discussions as they face very immediate shortfalls, which we're fortunate not to be in. So I find that interesting that as we look at some of the areas with lower per capita investment, we do see some of those struggles that I think are exceptional that RTD does not currently have. So that's just a kind of brief touch on some of the types of benchmarking discussions we had and things that ultimately I think can start to inform talking points as we engage with the region to help level set everybody when, I've frequently come across people making comparisons to other areas. I think it's useful to be able to come back to, well, what are those areas investing and how do we want to look at what Colorado might do moving forward? So with that, I'll move on and just also highlight, we looked at what the state share of funding is. As I mentioned, that's such a small part of our budget, and we notice it's a sizable portion of budget in agencies that have high levels of investment in transit on a per capita basis. We are 44th in the nation in terms of the state share of funds for transit. I want to be a little cautious and specific here that this can also be somewhat deceiving, because remember, we directly levy taxes on the taxpayer. Some states or some agencies, nothing is being levied to the taxpayer. They may be getting sales and use tax, which is fundamentally our same mechanism, but it may be going through a transportation fund coming from the state. But again, the extremes are very useful here and interesting. You can see out to the left, states that have a large portion of investment going into transit, and also, of course, the importance of having that funding coming from the state. You create an opportunity to have a backstop that folks further out on the right don't really have the luxury of having, which is very much the situation that we are in. I want to touch upon our midterm and long-term outlook. I know many of us are familiar with this, but as I said, we're going to be focusing on some communication. So you'll start to see some themes in here of what I believe we need to be communicating out to stakeholders. So I think it's important that, RTD is not facing near-term problems. This is, again, quite exceptional. We did spend some time, Mr. Michael Davies, our government relations officer, spent some time briefing the working group at one of our meetings on some of the situation for other transit agencies from BART in San Francisco, New Jersey Transit in New Jersey, SEPTA, et cetera, and the fiscal cliffs that they're facing. We're very fortunate that we're not in that position, particularly after the work that this board and this leadership team with Doug McLeod, our chief financial officer, and Mr. Morgan with creative investment opportunities, we've been able to shore up that midterm financial plan that's unique for us. But our long-term plan doesn't look so good. We remain susceptible to revenue volatility. As we know, we have a great deal of deferred maintenance. We still face a competitive labor market, supply chain issues, and uncertainty and inflation. So our near-term stability is very good, but our long-term is much more challenged. If we take a look back at the midterm financial plan that this board adopted, as we would recall, our net cash flow is positive in the most immediate years we have visibility to, but we do start to see a trend towards negative cash flow that we need to be paying attention to sooner rather than later. And that's because if we look back to the mobility plan for the future, this is something that the Revenue Diversification Working Group started to look back on here. You know, we had a lot of work done with our finance team and our consultants when we went through the Reimagine process. We spent, you know, good time and good money getting our crystal balls out and trying to forecast how things will play out. Of course, no one can quite know, you know, what things are going to look like in 2042, but again, extremes are helpful here. We had felt pretty confident during that effort of Reimagine that there is going to be a shortfall. It's important to note that that shortfall happens in the existence of current plans. This is the current service level. This is not new service. This is not adding additional service. This is if we continue to operate at about the level we are now, how our financial picture will look, with that dotted line being our projected revenue, the bars behind it being our costs. And this is where we have this long-term threat to say, well, we will face a shortfall. And the key question is, how might this impact service delivery? And I think this is ultimately where it's incumbent to say, not just a revenue diversification standpoint of mitigating that risk, but we also need to be seeking additional investment in transit. Shame on us if we don't communicate this out when the lever and the fulcrum are in the optimal position where small investments now can compound into big success later and covering RTD. Likewise, not acting now or acting in the negative now will compound into even more significant shortfalls. So we have a luxury many other transit agencies did not have, which is that we can dialogue now around adding investment and adding diverse investment to do this. So I'll come back to that when we talk about communication strategies, as I think we are going to have to engage with policymakers and voters. I want to pivot now and talk about Tabor, because this is one of our most immediate concerns, that again, those short-term moves upward that could compound into success, short-term impacts downward will compound into really exacerbating those shortfalls. That's absolutely the case with Tabor. I won't go through everything on this slide. I think the highlight, we're all very familiar here. I think everybody's familiar with the Taxpayer Bill of Rights and what implications it has for us. I think just what's important to note is that in 1999, voters exempted RTD's base system. Of course, at the time, that was just RTD. This was pretty fast-tracked for the purposes of paying off debt incurred to finance the construction of our Southeast and Southwest light rail lines and to operate them. This was to expire. We could go no later on this Tabor exemption than December 31st, 2026. Those bonds will be repaid in November 2024, which means it is at that time, November of this year, that the Tabor exemption on the base system will expire. Now, similarly on fast tracks, voters authorized to increase our 0.6% to our 1%, and those that is exempt from Tabor for the same reasons until fast tracks bond repayment, which comes in 2050. So the Tabor impact we're looking at is strictly on the base. This is because of the 1999 vote that essentially debruced us and expires with the repayment of debt this year in 2024. I thought it would be useful. I've looked around there that the Revenue Diversification Working Group has been looking for simple ways to visualize and just communicate out Tabor. There's plenty of great documents, but this is just a simple image to highlight the Tabor impacts that we're talking about. I think as we're all familiar, the yellow line is what we would have as a Tabor limit. This would be the cap on the revenues that we are allowed to collect as set formulaically. Something that often gets talked about, but is often not well visualized or understood, I think, is the ratchet effect. This is potentially one of the scariest things for us at RTD because of that outward shortfall. which is that if we have a recession or a down year, that resets the formula, and the ceiling ultimately still grows at the same formula. So that whole yellow line can snap down and stay down and then have to grow slowly. I think many of you will recall this was a major issue out of the 2008 recession, and voters had actually passed a referendum to give a break, essentially, to prevent the ratchet effect from truly decimating any number of public entities. This is a very real thing we need to be thinking about. When we know that we have long-term potential shortfalls, the idea of having a Tabor surplus that we refund is scary, but it's even scarier to have that known unknown, which is how that might snap down permanently. Our costs will go nowhere. Those bars on that the mobility plan for the future projections, that revenue can only really come down, which should concern us all. In terms of what's subject to Tabor, there was some nuance to this, although it is the base. There were some additional considerations that needed to be done. I'm happy if people have questions. Doug McLeod is here and who had done some research on this, as well as General Counsel Snyder. Approximately half or $600 million of our revenues will be subject to Tabor in 2025. I think the exact number that we had in one of the models, which of course will shift as our financial situation does, with $633 million. This includes virtually all revenue except for the 0.4% tax and federal funding. Again, that ratchet down impact could affect us. It's very difficult to deal in the hypotheticals, but one thing that the revenue diversification team that's on staff did was reach out to other entities that have dealt with Tabor impacts. Jefferson County, El Paso County are two that RTD did engage in conversations with. We've also had conversations with CU Leads and are working to understand what the impact may be. From what we understand so far, the best of our knowledge, it may be somewhere in the 7 to 10% impact range. That's the cap. So we could be looking at refunding between 7 and 10% of our revenues. Again, a little difficult in the hypothetical. Happy to answer some questions in sort of what the certainty levels on that are, what could influence that. But we're talking a lot of money here. If you do the math on the upper end, we could be looking at $60 million. Again, that will change year to year, but this is not like we're looking at a $1 to $2 million impact. We're looking at tens of millions of dollars being at risk. We did talk about mitigation efforts. There are other public agencies and entities and governments that have explored options to mitigate the impact. This is something we had talked about at the 2023 board retreat. One that has come up very frequently. It has been suggested to RTD by other stakeholders, and is one that came up in our board retreat in 2023, was creating an enterprise fund for our fees. Long story short around this actually has limited benefit. If you think about that, we have about $64 million in the 2024 budget going into fares. And if the impact is about 10%, and remember, not all of those fares are subject to Tabor, on the high end, you might be talking about saving $6.4 million, but that's moving $64 million into an enterprise fund. There are a variety of things we looked at in terms of the governance of said fund, as well as the limitations of what can be added to it. There are actually scenarios where this could work against you. So this sort of looked at this, not really being a viable solution for mitigation. Probably not surprising. The board deciding to pursue a debrucing looks like it would be the best option. There are limited opportunities to exempt revenue from Tabor. A debrucing seeks voter approval, as we're all aware. There is the potential, and this is something that we need to better understand. We're a little bit unique in terms of having Tabor impact in that we are strictly sales and use tax. So this is different than some other government agencies are looking at. And we're also different in that we provide a service where there is the possibility to explore non-cash Tabor refunds. We've talked about things like fare reductions and fare programs. there's quite a bit of consideration that would need to go into this. This is still something that we would be investigating, but should we be facing Tabor, there is some possibility that when we look at those, the refunds that would need to be done, we might be able to explore some non-cash options. So just wrap up with some next steps. First of all, the Tabor polling timeline. So the RTD, as we know, has retained a consultant to conduct polling to determine whether or not it looks viable to approach the voters and refer a ballot measure to D. Bruce RTD. That polling consultant was selected following a public solicitation in January. This consultant team did meet with staff and did meet with the Revenue Diversification Group to get an understanding of our financial outlook, of the challenges that are facing, and to start exploring where there could be value propositions in terms of what those shortfalls look like and how that may impact service. That polling is expected to be completed in March. I intend to get the boards together in April, which is when polling results will be coming in, and I'm sorry, the polling survey will be completed in March. The results will be available in April, which I intend to get this board together. What I'm envisioning right now, just to help mitigate impact to our board meeting, is to schedule a study session, work with the board office and you all to do that, so that we can look at what those polling results would say. Not on this timeline would be, then we would need to be discussing potential actions together as a board in May, so that we can be taking action in May or June on referring a ballot measure. So those things are to come here. We are taking a look at what that will look like. It's very, very apparent that this is something the board needs to be engaged in, looking at and taking a position on very soon. Finally, I wanted to touch on, it was very, very apparent that given that we're 44th in the nation for state funding, given that there's a lot of interest in transit in the state of Colorado, but given that we are a funding profile that ultimately is stretched quite thin across a very large service area, there's not a lot we can do to really move the needle on revenue without engaging with the state or voters on additional investments in transit. So what we discussed was that it would be very important to communicate to the public and to policymakers and be very transparent about our financial position, how we're doing right now, what our short-term position is, what our problems are going to be in the future, being certain about those, being transparent about those, being vulnerable with those, and communicating out some of the things that we've learned about other transit agencies, about investment, and allow then our public and allow our policymakers to start shaping a conversation around what do we want the transit future to look like. So our communications lead, Stuart Summers, started working in with the Revenue Diversification Working Group to gather information of what was being learned and look at some of the things that could be turned into visuals, and has started work on a website. The first version of this has just been published, but the intent here is it is an initial draft. This is to be evergreen. That you would just see sort of a skeleton framework right now. Many sections will be built out to really emphasize, what does Tabor mean to us? What does that long-term financial shortfall look like? What would that shortfall mean to riders, to the customers of RTD? So this is meant to be an evergreen website. I invite directors, I think I mentioned this at the last Finance and Planning Committee meeting, to reach out to the Revenue Diversification Working Group, to please feel free to work through me and the board office to provide suggestions and recommendations of what to be putting on this website. Where we'll probably first be turning attention on the communication side is Tabor. It's very important that we have what the order of magnitude is, what the impact is, and make sure that that is available to people to really just understand what this means. And then I think it's incumbent upon this board to take the information that we'll be putting out and be communicating with legislators, be communicating with the state. As we discussed at our retreat in 2024, I am working on some talking points. These are very close to completion with our government relations officer, Michael Davies, and shaping that around the discussion we had at the retreat of things we'd like to communicate out. It'll be no surprise that I would like us all to have some talking points around our financial situation so we can encourage the state to be considering additional investments. So I know this was a long presentation. I thank you all very much for your patience in going through this. There's a lot that we've learned. I'm happy to go offline with folks to show more of the data and things that we looked at. I'm happy to answer questions here. And as I said from the beginning, we're joined by our General Manager and CEO Johnson, of course, and Chief Financial Officer Doug McLeod, and General Counsel Snyder, and other members of the team that I'm sure could answer questions. So with that, Mr. Chair, I will hand the floor back to you for questions and discussion. And certainly I would invite members of the Revenue Diversification Working Group to raise their hand and add anything in that they would like throughout the course of the discussion as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Board Chair. We appreciate the very comprehensive presentation that the board has been looking forward to. Before recognizing any of the directors, let me ask whether General Manager, CEO, or any member of the Diversification Working Group would like to add some comments now before we take questions and comments from the committee.
Mr. Chair, our chair did an excellent job. I have nothing further to add at this time.
All right, thank you very much. I appreciate that. And let me turn first then to Director Deschel. You are recognized, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I apologize for the background noises. I'm in transit. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, sir, we can.
Fantastic. Chair Davidson, thank you, and to the entire working group, thank you so much. It's really great presentation, really great to see. One question, one sort of comment that doesn't need to be answered today, but would be good to know how we evaluated it. The first is, as we're looking at the numbers and the impact of Tabor, are those numbers inflation adjusted as you're looking outwards, or in the alternative, have we discounted those numbers for net present value to evaluate the full impact as we look at service today, right? So we could see what that impact would be on today's dollars. And the second is, we've seen over time a change in interpretation by the Colorado Supreme Court of what needs to go to the voters, what is a fee versus what is a tax. And I may have missed it, but where did we land on that analysis as we work with our state partners? I think in either event, we would need state support, whether it's an appropriation from a general fund or an assessment of a fee. Do we look at that sort of new interpretation of a fee and whether that would have a material enough impact such that it makes sense to pursue? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Director Deschel. Some compelling questions there, and I don't know if Board Chair Davidson has comprehensive responses, but at least he can give us an initial response now. So you are recognized, Mr. Davidson.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Director Deschel, and thanks, Mr. McLeod, for raising your hand there. I was going to see if you wanted to add anything on this. I can just directionally say I'd like to have Mr. McLeod address our Chief Financial Officer McLeod address the matter of the inflation in Tabor. It's a really important and good question. It's part of that ratchet down concern. I'll just briefly touch on the fee item. We did have some discussion around that. I think I would defer to, this is an area that I think is very important for our state to be considering as they consider transit funding and look at what might be possible. I would invite General Counsel Snyder if she would like to comment on the fees or not. There certainly are some limitations of what we can do from an RTD standpoint, but as the state might contemplate a transportation fund or contributions from a general fund, I do believe there are opportunities for them to look at fees, but I think it's important for us to work with the state and also have them be looking at what's possible there. So again, General Counsel Snyder, no need to respond, but if there's anything you wanted to chime in on there regarding some of our discussions, please feel free. But with that, I'd happily yield to Mr. McLeod on the items that Director Deschel asked about.
Thank you. And Mr. McLeod, you are recognized, sir.
Thank you, Chair Tisdale, and thank you, Board Chair Davidson, for an excellent presentation. Just to add a little bit to the question posed by Director Deschel regarding inflation. So yes, those numbers do include inflation. And you may recall within RTD's sales and use tax forecast, those are inflated as well. So everything that's been demonstrated in the presentation includes an inflationary factor or growth factor according to population growth, price forecasted increases based on Moody's projections, as well as our projections for inflation on the expenditure side. So that is included. Nothing has been present valued. So you're looking at actual real dollars of what we currently, with current information, project out what the impact could potentially be to revenue. So the $60 million figure is in today's dollars. $600 million is using the budgeted fair revenue that would be potentially subject using 2024, potentially subject in 2025 to Tabor ratcheting down. That would grow over time. On the fees section or the additional revenue, well, that has merit potentially from a revenue diversification standpoint. The only thing I wanted to add that as our revenue base grows, it still may be capped by Tabor. So, you know, additional efforts to add significant amounts of revenue could also subject that revenue to Tabor limitations, thereby being a zero-sum game in which we would still have a ceiling which is capped by the combination of the consumer price index within the Denver metro area, plus the change in property tax valuation growth. So that's all I had to say, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you very much. And let me, just because your name has been invoked, or at least your title, General Counsel, if you wish to add any comment at this time, you need not, but we invite you should you choose to.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't have anything else to add at this time.
All right, thank you very much. We appreciate that. Let me go first. Are there any other committee members who have questions or comments at this time for Board Chair Davidson? Mr. Vice Chair, you are recognized, and Director Lewis will come back to you in a moment, but first we go around to the committee members. So Vice Chair Guzman, you are recognized.
So I'd just like to make one comment really quickly when we're talking about everything that's come out in the last few weeks with the white paper and needing to be asked for money. Like, it's this conversation. 50% of our revenues are subject to Tabor, about $600 million. And we're being asked to give some unknown amount of money or commit some unknown amount of money to the FRPR project. And look, like, let's be honest here. I don't think any one of us who voted in 2004 are not interested in seeing solid rail line built. But that's a third of that amount of money that could potentially be asked of this board of taxpayer funds. And I want to say that because I think that the state needs to hear it, right? Like, the legislature needs to understand we are stewards of the money of the taxpayers of the region, and we are being asked to consider an unplanned and unspecified dollar amount to move forward with the plan from the governor's office to complete a rail line that we haven't even seen a project plan for yet and don't have much information on. So I'm a little peeved, right? Even as a newer director on this board, but as a longtime taxpayer in this district, that this is even coming up in the way that it is. Now, I want to be open-minded and I want to participate in this conversation, but I also want to say the only reason that we're sitting here doing this is because we do collect sales and use tax. So I'm going to repeat what I said before at a retreat here because it's appropriate. Taxation without representation is tyranny. Any move to change the governance of this board would be inappropriate at a legislative level unless the people of the district decide that that's what they want to do. I also think that it's really good we're having this conversation, and this will be my last comment, so thank you. We need to talk about how we're going to engage with the public and with other leaders, and we need everybody on the same board. So Chair Davidson, thank you for the very complete and thorough presentation. I do want to follow up with you on some of the information that may be relevant to that, and I cannot wait to see the talking points because we're going to be doing all of that work going forward. We've already started, right? This is not a joke. None of us are playing around. And with all of the naysaying that we get from everybody else on this board, we're the ones that look at these numbers every day and have the most intimate knowledge of this subject matter. And so I think that it behooves us to ensure every member of this board gets this recording and follows through with the transcript and the understanding of what we're viewing here, because this is going to be a make or break moment for RTD. And we cannot support our GM CEO or any of the executive suites members if we don't have this. And ultimately that means at the end of the day, we cannot support our operators, our janitors, our police force, or anything else until we really wrangle with this problem that we potentially face with the ratchet down. And so I hope everybody's ready to roll up their sleeves and get to work and tighten the belt and start taking the bus and the train and fill those suckers up. Because when I got over here, I was on my way back from downtown from a community event with the vice president. And we came back on the bus and the train specifically, and I wanted to see how full they were. And I had an at capacity bus coming home. So I want to see that in every district everywhere. But if we're going to face a shortage of being able to provide that minimum basic service that we're doing right now, there's no way that we can hope to grow without dealing with this on a higher level. Thank you. That concludes my comments.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice Chair. We certainly covered the waterfront there. That was excellent. I'm going to thank Director Lewis for his continued patience as I go to committee member Director Ruscia at this time and recognize her.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I actually just, I raised my hand because I wanted to concur with what Director Guzman just said. It would be hard to follow that one up, but I think it's irresponsible for us to be talking about a potential, and this is me speaking, not Director Guzman, but I think it's irresponsible for us to be talking about, you know, building a train to Boulder and perpetual, you know, O&M funding through a FISA or otherwise. Even just knowing what we know with this financial modeling, but more importantly, or just as importantly, I think that I do not think that these conversations will ultimately sit well with voters. I did have some questions about Chair Davidson's presentation, but I'd like a minute to collect my thoughts. So if it's okay, Mr. Chair, we can go to Director Lewis while I prepare that.
All right. Thank you very much, Director Ruscia. We'll certainly be open for you for any other questions as you formulate them. Let me now recognize Director Lewis.
Thank you, Director Guzman. Those were great comments. I just have two clarifying questions, and they're both on page 24. I'm hoping the handout matches up. It says in 2050, the 0.04 sales tax and use tax may be reduced. I'm just curious, does council have any comment on the word may instead of shall, and what constitutes may? I'm presuming we would have to go back to the ballot, but I just wanted a clarification on that.
Thank you. Let's take these in part if we can, because I know you have another question, but it sounds like you do. And Director Lewis, if you'll wait, I think that our Chief Financial Officer, Doug McLeod, may be able to respond to your question.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Director Lewis. Great question. So the way that the ballot language was written for the 2004 voter approval of fast tracks, and I paraphrase and would ask Melanie Snyder to please supplement any comments that I have, but essentially what the voters approved was that RTD would collect a 0.4 cent sales tax to expand with the Fast Tracks project, also use that 0.4 to pay off any bond debt, revenue bond debt that was incurred to build out that expansion, which happens to expire in 2050, with the intention that a portion of that 0.4 would sunset for any portion that is not necessary to operate and maintain the system beyond the payment of those bonds in 2050.
Thank you for that. And Director Lewis, if you have another question now, you may proceed with that.
And he might have answered this. It goes on to say, and I think they're referring to the exemption from Tabor. It says, for as long as any bond debt remains outstanding. And I guess I'm trying to read into the tea leaves here. I'm curious if we were to create another bond, let's say, for instance, to repair the tracks on the south end of the fast tracks, would that exemption continue?
Mr. Chair? Thank you.
Yes, please proceed.
Thank you. I saw the nod. Thank you. Appreciate the question. Great question as well. So as it stands, the voter approval for the fast tracks debt issuance as well as the collection of the tax occurred in 2004. Bond Counsel has advised RTD that bonding capacity has now expired after 20 years. So, and essentially RTD has used the vast majority. There was a small portion left of that bond capacity, and there were three legs. One was total repayment, one was principal balance, and one was annual debt service. RTD has exhausted all of that bond capacity, so we have no ability to issue additional bonds without getting voter approval. What we do have from a financing capacity standpoint, RTD is still able to issue certificates of participation, which have been deemed not subject to voter approval, essentially. However, it would obviously be a concern as to whether, if we issue those certificates of participation or COPs, whether RTD would be able to service the debt adequately. That's the only constraint there. But yeah, we're basically out of bonding capacity at this point on both the base system and fast tracks.
Thank you for that feedback.
All right, and thank you both for that colloquy. And Director Ruscia, it would appear that you have now had an opportunity to formulate your questions. Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thankfully for the rest of the committee, not too much time to formulate too many questions. But so this is for Chair Davidson or whomever, but can someone just like very clearly, for us, for the public, like state again what we say is short term and that impact? Like, can we repeat that? We jumped from short term to long term, and I felt like we got I got some mixed messages. Mr. McLeod was speaking a little fast, and I couldn't track all of that when he was answering, I think, a similar question. But Chair Davidson, would you be kind enough to just like restate very, very clearly like what you're talking about when you say short term, and like what is the potential immediate impact like in the next couple of fiscal years?
All right, thank you. And Chair Davidson, if you'd care to give some clarification relative to your use of the phrase short term, and perhaps you can add midterm and long term to give us a context for those. Please proceed.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Director Ruscia, for the question. Mr. McLeod, I'll certainly open the floor to you as well if there's anything you'd like to add to this. I would say that midterm, I'll start there, is very much that midterm financial plan. And under that midterm financial plan, we are able to deliver services and operate at the levels that we would project and that we are today. So we have stability there, even though in the latter portion of that midterm financial plan, we show negative cash flow. We have the reserves to be able to continue to operate. Short term, I'm thinking very much in that early portion of the midterm financial plan, years 1, 2, and 3, that are especially stable, where we're looking at net positive cash flow. When I'm thinking long term, I'm generally referring to the mobility plan for the future projection that is looking at the decade we're not in and thereon. So the 2030s and thereon. That's where we really see a consistent level of shortfall that's projected according to the midterm. I'm sorry, I keep saying that. The mobility plan for the future projections. So I'm thinking long term as starting the 2030s and looking out from there. I would put the caveat that while we are financially stable at this very moment on that short and midterm, obviously Tabor has a real impact on that. And in fact, we're starting to look at how many years we could continue on at current service levels in the Tabor environment. So we are currently financially stable, short term being the next 1 to 3 years, midterm stable, looking at the midterm financial plan on a 6-year horizon. Long term is thinking the next decade and out, where we have consistent projected shortfalls. Mr. McLeod, if it's okay with you, Mr. Chair, is there anything that you would like to add to that?
Mr. McLeod, you may proceed.
Thank you, and thank you, Chair Davidson. That's a great summary. And I would just like to point out as well, so you did mention that currently we're in good financial shape from a financial standing standpoint. We do have some discussion items, and these are all planned to be in to correlate with the information coming out of the Revenue Diversification Working Group. Those items will be brought to this committee to talk about the fiscal policy, in which we'll start having those discussions that would potentially include recommendations of and discussions about our financial position, what some potential scenarios might look like, as well as some possible things that we can do as an agency to shore up our financial position more on an ongoing basis and address the needs for shocks that we may encounter in the future. So I think while we're subject to Tabor and some of these things may be somewhat out of our control, we can address from a governance standpoint, how do we prepare ourselves best to address those situations when they do arise? So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. And Director Ruscia, any follow-up question based upon that, or did you have additional questions?
Maybe a combination of both. May I?
Please.
Thank you. So kind of related to this, looking back to the reimagine, the DRCOG fiscally constrained scenario suggested that we need a tax increase. And I was wondering if someone could address, why we've set that aside and just give us a better picture as to, I think I might know the answer, but it would be very helpful if we could touch on that today.
Director Davidson, Mr. Chair, you may proceed.
Sure, and if anyone else would like to add from the Diversification Working Group, please as well. That's a great question, Director Ruscia, and that constrained and talking about the additional tax. I think that is definitely something this board could consider and could look at, and we could engage on. My personal sense in looking at that long-term plan and how we project sales and use tax and consumer spending to grow, it would be good to identify alternative sources that, while we're looking for increased investment, we are also looking for diversity that can provide some backstop and spread out risk. And that's why I think, certainly the board could look at that, as the Reimagine effort had suggested in that mobility plan for the future. I personally would say that there's an opportunity to do two things at once and look for additional investment in transit and mitigate that risk that we have from a lack of diversity.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Ruscia, do you have one more question?
One more question, sir?
I say, do you have one more question?
At least I'll try to keep them brief, I guess. So Director Davidson, I just want to make sure I understand what you just said, that so it's not so much that RTD disagrees with that modeling, okay, just that right now we are not, as a policy making body, entertaining the idea of asking for a tax increase. And so would it be reasonable to assume that in relation to, polling, that that's not something that we're asking voters how they would feel about it?
Mr. Chair, you may respond to that.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair and Director Ruscia. The polling right now happening is really focused just on Tabor. I think it certainly could be something that this board would consider as a policy matter, whether or not to explore a tax increase. I think if we were to do that, it would be good for us to then poll and explore that as a potential opportunity. I think we'll probably have a situation where we need to tackle this in a series of phases and steps. The most immediate thing we're facing right now is Tabor. And as Chief Financial Officer McLeod mentioned, and thank you for mentioning it, is that even if we start adding revenue on top of this, but we're facing Tabor, we run the risk of not having a big enough impact. So the short-term focus is, let's get a strategy around Tabor and try, take a position on what we do there. In terms of what comes next, the nice thing about being stable on a midterm horizon is we have a little bit of time to decide how we should act. Not a lot of time, because investments now have a compounding return for us. But I do think that certainly this board could consider a tax increase. And I would definitely say that we don't, I certainly wouldn't disagree with the finding there. I just think there's an opportunity for the board to consider ways to find diverse revenue sources, which I would argue looks like an engagement with our state partners and trying to look for general fund or transportation fund opportunities that present a stronger backstop to the consumer volatility we face with the sales and use tax today.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And I'll just point out that in the 26 or 27 pages of the presentation, there was nothing mentioned about a tax increase. Director Ruscia, I'll yield to you for one more question if you want to wrap up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for your generosity. I referenced the other modeling because we'd spoken so much about Reimagine. So I just packet page 27. It's Chair Davidson, you said that extending debrucing is the best option. I just wanted clarifying question: are we talking about temporarily or permanently?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You may respond.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Director Ruscia. That's something to be explored out of the results of the polling. I think that's based on what we find from the polling, something that we would be discussing as those results come in terms of what might be available to us.
Thank you very much. We appreciate that. Are there any other committee members or visiting directors who have questions at this time? I will note, for the sake of the record, we've spent about an hour and 5 minutes or so discussing this excellent presentation, and everyone is, of course, encouraged and allowed to have separate dialogue with the Revenue Diversification Working Group with further questions. But I think, respectful of our time and the balance of the agenda, I would ask, if you have something you'd like to bring up now and you can do so succinctly, please do so. So I'll pause and allow anyone to raise their hand. And seeing none, I thank you, Mr. Chair, for your excellent presentation, and all of the members of the Revenue Diversification Working Group for the hard work you put in on this. We know we have a lot before us, and let me emphasize, the report from the working group is a regular part of our agenda going forward. Every month we will hear more. So if you haven't had a chance to formulate all of your thoughts or reactions, you will be given more opportunities each month of this year. And of course, in April, we're looking forward to the polling results. With that, we will now then turn to the recommended actions on our agenda. There is one recommended action on the agenda this evening, which action is for the approval of the 2024 Finance and Planning Committee Work Plan. And the recommended action specifically is for the Finance and Planning Committee to approve the 2024 committee work plan. Is there a motion?
So moved. Second.
I have Director Geisinger as the movant, and I have Director Broom as the second on that. And I appreciate that. And regarding this work plan, I would like to note, for the sake of the record and for all of you, that changes have been made to the draft that we discussed at the board retreat based upon director input that was received at the retreat. The changes are highlighted for your convenient reference. And I would like to ask Doug McLeod, our Chief Financial Officer, and Jack Kroll, the Board Office Executive Manager, if they have any additional comments to present to the committee regarding the committee's proposed work plan at this time.
Chief Financial Officer Doug McLeod, I do not. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Kroll, do you have anything that you would like to add to that?
Thank you, Committee Chair Tisdale. This is Jack Kroll, Executive Manager of the Board Office. I do not have anything further to add other than to say I think this is a great example of how the committee saw an initial draft, provided some input and feedback. The committee chair and the committee vice chair worked very closely with staff to incorporate that feedback. And this is a good mix of ideas that the board wishes to discuss and tackle throughout the year, as well as mandatory items the administration will bring to them for their approval and input.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kroll. Are there any committee members now who have questions, comments, or concerns addressed to the proposed work plan? This would be the appropriate time to raise them, and I will begin by recognizing Vice Chair Guzman.
Hey, y'all. So I just wanted to say not to forget that this is a living document, and this is the best plan going forward that included everybody's commentary and suggestions. But this is not by any means the final draft. This is not etched in stone, and so we do have flexibility with this work plan. But it also helps lay out the year, so when we know, Chair Davidson just brought up the fact that we'll get more information at the end of March and may have a conversation in April and May. Some of that may have to come through this committee or go through Ops and Safety or Executive. This will help guide that, and we'll be able to plan functionally how we will not obliterate ourselves in one single committee meeting and have to do, what was the phrase, Lynn? I'm sorry, Director Geisinger, yeoman's work. I don't know, but that we can balance it out through the whole year and still do yeoman's work, just at a more controlled pace. So just a friendly reminder on that one. And feel free to email our chair, Doug Tisdale, or myself, and we will make sure that any of that commentary gets passed on and is appropriately handled when we come back to meet on these. But it's been fun working with all of you. So I hope we have a great year.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice Chair. Excellent point to emphasize once again, it is not cast in concrete. It is not written in stone. It is, in fact, a living document that will be adjusted as needs and circumstances dictate. Director Broom, you are recognized, sir.
Yeah, I might point out that I think in future years, maybe this will be introduced earlier in the year rather than, several months in. We don't want to fall in the trap of the federal government where they're still doing the budget in the 11th month.
Thank you very much. We appreciate that. And just for those who might wonder as to the timing, some of this is dictated by the realities of the calendar year and when we elect our officers and select new committee chairs and vice chairs, which is at the first meeting in January. So we don't have as much flexibility on timing, but we can proceed expeditiously. I will also note that this was our first exercise. We now have a good working template that we can use and revise in the future. And I think that's something that will address the concern that you raised, Director Broom. Thank you. Director Ruscia, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm looking at the highlighted the additions. There is a reference for the April meeting. It says budget, content, and process with proposed changes. And then the following month, there's a discussion on fiscal policy. And then June, the next month, there's the draft budget framework. Could someone just kind of briefly explain if those things are all tied together, and will there be an action item relative to how our budget is presented, or is that just assumed to be part of future changes to fiscal policy?
Excellent question, and thank you for seeing the thread, because there is a thread that goes through those. And we begin with the fact that the budget content is something that we specifically added because there were questions raised, and it's what I have called the Goldilocks effect, when in prior years we had so much information it was overwhelming, and then we got the skinny mini version of it, which was so lean and mean that there were many directors who felt that there was a lot of information that they did not have and would have liked to have. And now what we're looking for is the Goldilocks effect, where it'll be just right. And that's why we have the content being addressed first, and then the fiscal policy, which is a broader overarching policy review leading into then the actual draft budget framework in advance of ultimately the budget being presented. But as you know, the budget is presented to this committee after staff has spent weeks and weeks and months putting together all of that information to come up with the budget. So that's, if you will, the tracing of the thread. With that, let me ask Mr. McLeod, our Chief Financial Officer, if he has anything to supplement to that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I would like to thank Chair Tisdale and Vice Chair Guzman for working through this, because essentially what our intent is to have ongoing discussions leading up to the budget, have a constant discussion, board feedback about what that would look like, what content we'll suggest, potential content, potential adjustments to the reporting format. So by the time we get to the budget, we will have in October a draft budget that by that time we intend to have it in the format that the board would like to see, then come back in November with a recommended action to approve the budget for 2025. So as Chair Tisdale mentioned, it's intentional with this schedule to really get a lot of feedback and a lot of interaction and collaboration in making any modifications to that process and reporting.
Thank you very much, Mr. McLeod. Are there other committee members or visiting directors who have any questions, comments, or concerns they would like to express relative to this recommended action item to adopt the committee's 2024 work plan? Seeing no one indicating a desire to speak at this time, I will proceed to a vote, and I will ask, are there any no votes by the committee members on this action item? Hearing no votes, then we have a unanimous adoption by the committee members here with no negative votes and no abstentions on the motion that was made by Director Geisinger and seconded by Director Broom. And I want to add one important note here for the sake of transparency, and that is that the work plan only has to be approved by this committee. It does not require separate approval by the full board. That said, the approved work plan will be shared with the full board for reference and review, and obviously even for comment should that be desired. There are no other recommended action items. We have a discussion item now, just one, and that discussion item on our agenda is for the account-based ticketing contract extension. And at this point in time, I would call upon Charlene Polegi, our Chief People Officer at RTD, to present this item. So Ms. Polegi, if you would please present. Oh, wait, Mr. McLeod, I believe I'm not seeing Ms. Polegi, so I assume you are stepping into those shoes for purposes of a presentation. Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And yes, I'd like to also introduce Monica Tripel-Harnke, who is the Senior Manager of Revenue, who has joined me to answer any specific questions. And I'd like to take this opportunity as well to recognize Monica, Mrs. Tripel-Harnke, for her efforts with implementing the fare structure and equity analysis recommendations that were put in place with the fare structure changes. She really ran point on that effort, the 18-month effort. There were a whole host across the organization of individuals who put in a lot of work, but Monica is truly our fare revenue and revenue expert. So I just wanted to give her a shout out during this public presentation. This discussion item is being brought this month to allow time for committee consideration. The intent would be to come back on the April 16th April 16th Finance and Planning Committee with a recommended action for the committee to undertake consideration of actually extending this contract with Mesabi. So there's a lot of information, I hope, that explains what we're asking for within the discussion item in the board report. So I'll just give a few highlights. Mesabi is the company that RTD contracts with to provide mobile ticketing as well as account-based ticketing. So they're essentially responsible for the vast majority of electronic purchases of fare revenue for our customers. That accounts for approximately 60% of fares. And when I talk about the system that Mesabi provides through both ABT and mobile ticketing, which is also known as the MyRide app, they provide the back office software that supports those transactions. So for our customers, if you have a mobile device, the software application within that mobile device for the MyRide app is all hosted as well as provided by Mesabi. In addition to mobile ticketing, a large portion of our transactions through the EcoPass program, the College Pass program, and the Neighborhood EcoPass program, all those transactions and validations occur through our ABT system. So there's a large number of our customers that use that system. Mesabi has provided excellent service in the many years that we've been with Mesabi, providing this service, and we've done several upgrades along the way. So we started with mobile ticketing, then went to account-based ticketing, and discontinued using card-based ticketing. It's very well received by our customers. Mesabi has been an excellent partner. They provide a lot of research or a lot of support, staff support, as well as in the past, we've had Zero Fare for Better Air. We've had New Year's Eve fares. That takes some effort in terms of programming, not only our fares themselves on an ongoing basis, but making those adjustments. They've always been very responsive, very helpful in our interactions. So what this recommended action that will be coming in April asks to do is to extend that contract with Mesabi an additional 2 years rather than going out to RFP right away, as staff continues to develop an overall fare revenue system strategy that's aligned with our strategic initiatives. So we really want to look at the whole system. So we have cash paying customers through our fare boxes. We have customers that use ticket vending machines on our rail platforms. We have customer service outlets that actually sell our paper tickets, as well as King Soopers and Safeway. So we really want to look at that whole system and how we provide services with a lens towards equity. And it's kind of the second step to implementing all the fare changes that have been very well received thus far by our customers that occurred at the beginning of this year. We want to continue that support process with the functionality that we currently have for the next 2 years, extending the contract from June of 2024 through June of 2026 to allow enough time to evaluate future needs, as well as go out to RFP. So you can imagine replacing a system that's that critical to RTD's operations takes a great deal of time. We believe 2 years would be the time necessary to make that happen. So with that, Mr. Chair, Monica and I would be happy to answer any questions that the committee may have. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you very much. And I need to extend a formal apology both to Ms. Pelagi and to Ms. Tripel-Harnke, because I knew that Monica was the one who was supposed to be here with you on this. And for some reason, I just transferred myself into a different place and called upon Ms. Pelagi, but she should not be embarrassed by the fact that she's not here because this is not her item. And so we have both our Chief Financial Officer, Mr. McLeod, and Ms. Monica Triple-Harnke, who are available to respond to any questions or comments that any of the committee members first would have to raise to them. So are there any questions or comments from committee members? Seeing none at this time, let me ask, are there any other directors who are present? Oh, I'm sorry, Director Ruscia, I did not see your hand until just now. Please, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is from Mr. McLeod. I just want to understand that I want to make sure I understood your framing, because we're talking about a 2-year extension and looking at other ways, I guess, ways to make it easier to buy a ticket to ride the bus. So is this 2-year like buying more time? Should the board, not expect, I guess, any other updates or enhancements in terms of mobile ticketing, or I should just not even just mobile ticketing, but fare purchase options generally?
Mr. McLeod, if you can answer that.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. And no, there would not preclude any potential fare changes or enhancements from a system fare provision perspective. So certainly we would continue to make certain adjustments or updates or changes as technology changes. And if there's something certainly that our customers wanted, we would come to the board to have that discussion too, that we would be considering something of that nature, working within the realm of, we do have some things to discuss in the future that are somewhat related that are on our work plan, such as continuation of the zero fare for youth, et cetera. So that those conversations, those changes would be ongoing. And still follow that same process. The intent of the 2 years would be to take approximately 6 months or less to really evaluate our overall system. The rest of the time would allow for potential requests for proposals to make sure that it's a competitive search to replace once the contract is ended. With Mesabi, also understanding that that 2 years gives us enough time to do that, plus implement and test the system and do all those communications. So certainly there would be much discussion. And under Monica's leadership over that area, there's been some discussion about additional enhancements that may have merit that we would bring back to the board. There's new technology involving tap to pay with credit cards, other things. And we've deliberately set up this system so that it's transferable. So other providers, there's nothing necessarily unique to the back office system of what Mesabi provides to RTD other than their proprietary software. So we've deliberately set up the ability to replace a system with a new system with a new vendor if that should occur.
Thank you, sir. Director Ruscia, just noting for the record, at RTD, innovation never sleeps. Did you have any further comments that you wanted to raise at this time?
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. All right. And Mr. Vice Chair Guzman, you are recognized, sir.
You all thought you were off the hook, huh? No. Mr. McLeod or Ms. Triple-Harnke, I'm just curious, this system that we have right now, if I understand it correctly, it's not just MyRide app, but this is also the same system that is when I pull up my Lyft app and I'm trying to figure out, I can get this far here, but I can just get to the A line and then jump on the train. This is the same integrated system that we're using in all of those for the payment services? Is that what's going on here? It's
Mr.
not just
McLeod.
one form. Thanks.
Thank you for the question. And I'd like to defer to Monica because she does have a little bit better understanding of those interactions. But please, Monica, if you can add some color to that question, please.
Ms. Triple-Harnke.
Monica Kleiping-Hornke, Senior Manager of Revenue. So the Masabi system is integrated with Transit app and Uber, Lyft. They no longer do transit ticket purchases. So yes, but the whole payment, okay, the ticket purchases go through the Masabi app with integrations. So if we, want it in the future, because we talked about innovations or enhancements, if that's something that, RTD decided in the future to do, maybe some additional integrations that would be possible through the Masabi app. It is also possible through any, new vendor we may be selecting.
All right, thank you. And Mr. Vice Chair, is that responsive to your question?
Yes, sorry, I forgot to lower my hand.
That's fine. Thank you very much, sir. Director Ruscia, you are recognized again.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had a moment to collect myself. Please don't make me laugh. Something in the delivery got me. So I just want to say thank you to Mr. McLeod, because I did have a mild panic attack when I thought you were saying that we would not have this discussion again for another 2 years. But this is a piggyback off of what Director Guzman just said and what was just stated. Within the apps, like, I guess within our current options, is it possible, I'm not saying are we or will we, but is it possible, for example, if somebody wanted to pay for a ticket, like, and use like Google Pay or something? I mean, we talked about, tap to pay, which is 5 or 6 years old now, but even just, being able for the customer to be able to like easily link, another payment option where that, information is already saved. Is that something that we could explore within the current infrastructure?
That's an excellent question. Can you Venmo on to the RTD? Mr. McLeod, your thoughts?
Thank you. And I would like Monica to help explain the payment options that currently exist. We accept many different types of payments, such as Visa, MasterCard, but I think Monica can talk a little bit more about some of these other types of payment possibilities.
Mr. Chair?
Ms. Trapel-Harn.
Thank you. I think that, okay, there might be 2 questions, or I'll start with just the payment options that we have in the current system, which are credit card, debit cards, Google Pay, and I believe it's either Apple Pay or Google Pay that we will be introducing very, very soon over the next few months. The other kind of bigger project or bigger type of payment that we'll be discussing, but we have not made any decisions if that's a good direction to go, and if so, what timing would be good, would be people just tapping on the validator directly with a contactless credit card or their Apple Wallet or their Google Wallet. So that's going to be a bigger discussion because that's more involved, and it might require a separate contract with either Masabi or a third-party vendor. So yes, we're exploring all these, and in the very short term, the Google and Apple Pay in the app should be available.
Thank you very much. And Director Ruscia, is that responsive to your question then?
Yes, thank you. I just want to make sure we're making it as easy as possible for people to give us money for their tickets and buy tickets. So thank you for that update.
A worthy goal indeed. Are there other questions, comments, concerns from any committee members or from any of our visiting directors relative to the account-based ticketing contract extension discussion item? Seeing none, we'll conclude that discussion item, and we will look forward to seeing an action item at our April meeting now that we've had an opportunity to vet that further. We turn next then on our agenda to other matters. Are there any other matters that any committee members wish to raise at this time? Director Broom, you are recognized.
Thank you, Chair. I understand there's a large storm looming in the Denver metro area. And I wonder if we could get a brief presentation on what steps are being taken to prepare for that by our agency.
Thank you, sir. I'm sure that'll be addressed tomorrow night too, both during operations and safety, because that's their realm, but also because it'll probably be going on at that time. So let me call upon our general manager and CEO, Ms. Johnson, to address that now, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the question, Director Broom. Reflecting back on the conversation we had back in January during the Martin Luther King weekend when we had sub-zero temperatures, recognizing that our operating environment has fluctuations in weather conditions, we have at the ready our weather plans that we activate. We continually monitor what's happening. Just as a matter of fact, today, communique was disseminated to all of RTD regarding our emergency preparedness aspects, whereby we provided information relative to what's happening. More specifically, what we do is we have snow level services at varying levels. We assess the operability of our stations and our infrastructure and make determinations about what is happening. Our folks that staff our operations control center, both on the rail and bus side, engage with operations staff and are highly communicative relative to service disruptions, notifications, and things of the like. And that is no different from any other mitigations that we put forward in reference to ensuring that we are providing services in a meaningful manner to basically reduce the potential for impacts. And more specifically, CDOT is evaluating what is happening as well relative to whether or not they're going to issue a do not travel response relative to the weather and what may come with accumulations representing precipitation. So we will take all of that under advisement as we go forward.
Thank you very much, Madam General Manager and CEO. I appreciate that. Director Broom, did you want to supplement?
Oh, thank you.
Thank you very much. We appreciate that, sir. And Director Ruscia, you have an other matter to bring before us.
I do. May I bring two, Mr. Chair?
Yes, can we, are they joined or do you want to do them separately?
However you will allow.
All right, please, we would be happy to hear both. Let's try to do one at a time. So please bring the first one forward and then rest assured we will come back to you for the second.
Thank you for your generosity, Mr. Chair. So first, and I hope I'm not stealing anyone else's thunder or speaking too entirely out of order, I just wanted to, while we're here, I wanted to recognize Mr. Ford. If he didn't, he dropped off my screen. I don't know if he dropped off the call. Okay, so now he's back on the screen. But anyway, I just wanted to recognize that there was an announcement going out that Mr. Ford will be retiring soon, and so I just wanted to say thank you. And again, I apologize if I took the wind out of your sails, Mr. Chair, if you were going to mention that. But I just wanted to make sure that I said something while I was thinking about it. I saw that email right before I logged on.
That's fine. I thank you. You actually stole my line because I was going to take a moment to acknowledge Mr. Ford's presence, Mr. Ford's service, Mr. Ford's dedication, and his fantastic career, including running things in my old stomping grounds in Ann Arbor. And it's a privilege to have him with us this evening. I anticipate he might also be hearing some of these same words tomorrow evening at the Operations and Safety Committee as our Assistant General Manager for our Chief Operating Officer, so Operations Officer. So I appreciate that, but that's very kind. And before going to your second point, Director Ruscia, if I may, I would like to open the floor to Mr. Ford if he would like to make any comments at this time. Not compelled to do so, but free to do so.
Thank you, Chair. Michael Ford, Chief Operating Officer. Thank you for your kind words. I appreciate the settlement here, and thank you again. And it's been 6 years, 6 long years. So thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. We all stand in appreciation of your fine work. Director Ruscia, I proceed back to you now for your second item you wanted to raise.
Yes, and I apologize again, Mr. Chair, if I was too out of turn. I saw that email before we started, and I wanted to say something before I forgot. But my I don't know if it's I guess we'll call it a request for information or just a thought for the group. I was reflecting on memos from last year about our FISA account and the history and some board policy. And then when I went to look in our our board documents and try to search for accompanying resolutions, I found it a little bit difficult, just because that search function can get clunky. And so I wanted to ask, would it be possible for staff, and I'm not asking for a whole historical accounting of the FISA, but to collect board resolutions, including the original one, and maybe get that out to the board, or perhaps Mr. Kroll could put it in a SharePoint folder, just so that we have kind of a library to access. And to that end, since we're talking about fiscal policy, I also was just wondering, maybe we consider, having a kind of single cheat sheet like we do with our general fiscal policy about the FISA, and where that currently, what board policy right now is attached to it, and or incorporate that into our fiscal policy as we look to making an enhancements and having that discussion. So I just wanted to bring that up, and I'll just give an example. I wasn't sure if per our current policy vis-a-vis the FISA, if we could use the FISA for O&M, and I didn't know where to look. And so I just and that I kind of went through that deep dive, and possibly maybe we don't have a policy on it, but I think that might be helpful for us. Again, I really appreciate the memos. It was very well summarized for me personally. I also work well if I could look at source documents, and given that the FISA will be a topic of conversation in the coming weeks, I thought that might be beneficial. So I just wanted to raise that. And similarly, like if there is another document that exists, or maybe a folder that could be pulled together that has our current policies for other funds like unrestricted. And again, I'm not asking for a big staff memo, but even just, again, like those original source documents, maybe put in a library for us. I know I would learn a lot from it, and I thought perhaps my colleagues would appreciate that as well. Not everyone has the memory of Chair Tisdale. And so I just wanted to put that out there and see what staff thought. And I hope it wasn't yeah.
Thank you very much for that comment, Director Ruscia. I think it would be an exceptionally helpful and beneficial task, as you have indicated, just to collect the source documents, not looking for taking up any staff time in terms of creating a complicated analysis, but rather making the raw information available to the directors. And it prompts me to make the observation that former Director Judy Lubow may be gone, but she is not forgotten. And this was a topic of great interest and concern to her through the years. So I appreciate that suggestion, and I will be happy to follow up with board staff in seeing what we can do about that. Are there any other matters for directors to bring up at this time, either committee members or otherwise, that pertain to the Finance and Planning Committee? Seeing none, then we'll close the other matters portion of our agenda. And I will note that the next Finance and Planning Committee meeting is scheduled for Tuesday, April 16th, same time, same RTD channel, as set forth in our now approved committee work plan. The key items on that agenda will be discussions related to sales and use tax revenue, the content of the annual RTD budget that is presented to the board for approval, and a discussion related to the polling results that RTD has received related to a potential Tabor ballot initiative. Additionally, we are slated to consider recommended actions related to zero fare for better air, and also related to the East Colfax BRT project. As a reminder, our agenda and our work plan are always subject to change. Nonetheless, April looks to be another exciting meeting of the Finance and Planning Committee, and I definitely look forward to seeing all of you there. And seeing no other discussion, for the sake of the record, I will note that we now adjourn this meeting as of 7:21 p.m. Mountain Daylight Time this day in March. Thank you all very much. Have a most pleasant evening.